God's love letter to us. And so these are the things, some of the things that I have been concentrating on. Before we begin, let's just concentrate on 7 words of the number, back up. I want to concentrate on 7 words, which is in the 5th statement that comes from the Hong Kong Evangelical Statement of Faith. And those words are, God created man in his own image. You believe that?
Yes.
There's a problem here, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But the whole statement reads, let's read the whole statement together. God created man in his own image. Man rebelled against God's law. Sin fell. His spiritual image was corrupted, so that he needed to be born again. And I want to talk mostly about this first sentence, God created man in his own image. And I think for most of us, when we look at that, we can identify pretty easily with the last part, because we know that we're sinners and all of that. And so sometimes it may be hard for us to remember the fact that we are created in God's image. And, we wonder, how can we ever hope to live up to what is in God's image? So those are some of the questions. Another reason that I want to talk about this subject is because it gives some crucial answers to some of our biggest questions that we have asked for all of man's history. For example, it talks about our origin. Our origin. Who are we? Where did we come from? Did you ever ask that question? Sometimes, we ask those questions. Or another one, we may ask about, why are we here? What purpose do we have here in this world? And these questions are basic questions that philosophers have argued or debated and have different ideas about through all history. They've debated these kinds of questions. And besides these important questions, there are many social issues that we face today. And all of them relate somehow to God's image in us. Abortion. That's an issue that's being debated. In fact, in the U.S., all of the Democrats in running for election against President Trump believe in abortion. Even some of them even say, even after a child is born, or up to the last breath before a child is born. So what's the difference between the day before they're born and the day after they're born? They're created in God's image, and He tells us that in Psalm 139, which is familiar to many of you. Alcohol or substance abuse. How do we treat our bodies? How do we live our lives? Then you have issues of gender confusion, gay marriage. Some people say there's a gay gene, and people are born with a tendency to be gay. What about racism? Racism, that's very common in many cultures, and many of you probably have felt a little bit of discrimination or other things related to that. Human trafficking and slavery. These are some of the issues. Management of our environment. People talk about climate change, about the global warming, these kinds of things. Suicide, or sometimes it's called euthanasia, like if a doctor assists you to kill yourself, and that's becoming increasingly common. where the doctors will. Maybe a person has trouble or they have sickness, and so they want the doctor to end their life. And the English word for that is euthanasia. Now, when I first heard that term euthanasia, it was new to me. I thought they're saying euthanasia, but that's the word is euthanasia, which means like killing yourself, as a doctor might. The other issue that we're facing right now is governance. What is a good governor? How do you govern people? All of these have to do with the image that we have of God's image in us, how we look at other people, how we see God, how we see each other. So all of those issues are important. And as I mentioned, governance, this is one of the issues that we are facing today in Hong Kong. What is good governance? How does a political leader see themselves? You know, in many countries, I hear about the African countries and other countries where the leaders are corrupt. They just are in it for themselves, and the decisions that they make are for themselves and not for the people. What about Hong Kong? How can a person have be a good governor? How do you see the people that you are ruling over? Those are some of the important issues that we are debating today. But we have to remember that no matter what, even if our world is not just today, and we see a lot of injustice, we see a lot of people being treated unfairly, a lot of discrimination, but the Bible tells us that even though our world is not fair, God is fair. And one day, each person will give an answer to how they have treated other people. Now, there's one organization that is called PETA. Anybody know what PETA means?
Red. Red.
Figuring out different things. You know, some humans are not very good at math, and I'm one of them. That was my least favorite subject in school. But I'm glad that God gifted some people to use mathematics. So God gave us different abilities than animals, much, much higher than any animals. He made us with His own, in His image. He made us in His image to be able to do those things. Another one that He has given us is our sense of what is right and wrong, or we might say our conscience, or our moral compass. Many people see things in our world that are not right and fair. And then when injustice happens, we get angry. A lot of times we blame it on God, and we say that He doesn't really care about our situation. Or maybe we say, we come to the conclusion that God isn't big enough to handle the problems that I have. Maybe we just say that God is not big enough to handle all of the big problems that we have in our world, and that He's somehow lost control. However, injustice and wrongdoing are not evidence that God does not exist. In truth, it's evidence that He has put that part of Himself in us. How many of you take care of children? Yeah. Did you ever hear the word, "It's not fair"?
Yes.
Where did they come from? It's not fair. Yeah. So many times our kids would say that, he got more candy than I did, or when you divide a piece of cake, Their piece is bigger than my piece. One of the ways we solved that was by asking one of the children to cut it. And we only had two. That was fortunate at that point. One of them would cut the cake, and then the other one got the first choice. So they would be sure that they would cut it in equal sizes. But where does that come from, that sense of fairness? It has to come from the fact that God has put that part of himself in us, because we know that God is fair and he is just, even if we don't see it in our world today. As I mentioned before, there's going to be a time when God will right all the justices and wrongs that have been done. So that comes from God. Again, we're different from animals. Does a lion or a bear, would they feel guilty if they killed somebody?
No.
I don't think so. How about if a poisonous snake bites a person and that person dies? Will that snake feel guilty? Or how about if a mosquito bites a person and gives them dengue? Are those mosquitoes going to feel guilty about it? So God put that sense of moral rightness into our conscience. Now you might argue that maybe dogs feel guilty. Last night we were watching Funniest Home Videos, and one of the videos, the lady was holding up was it a pillow or something to the dog and said, "Did you chew on this? Did you chew on this?" And the dog was. Now, I don't think the dog probably was feeling guilty, but probably he was just feeling the anger of the owner of that pillow that he chewed. But man feels guilty, not animals, because we are different, and God has put that into us. Another reason, or another way that we are created in the image of God, letter D. Is there a letter D? Is it next one? Is the one above? This one? Okay, here we go. Okay, let's read this together. God gave Adam and Eve the authority and job description to reign over the created world. You know, when we look back, I'm sorry, I remember what I was going to do. Go back to the other verse. In verse 26.
And God said, "Let us make man
He will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and small animals that scurry along the ground."
Okay, let's just stop there. So what is our job description that he has given us when he created us? Yeah, to reign the world. Now, we may not be doing a very good job of that, are we? But I think that's part of what God has put in us, the ability to do that, to the ability to change our world. In our modern times, I think we're trying to figure out how to do that. How do we try to keep animals from going extinct? You know, there's animals all the time that are going extinct. How do we try to stop them from becoming extinct? And it's especially hard in our world because the population is growing more and more, and because the land where the animals roam is becoming less and less. So it's getting difficult to do that and to manage it. How do we care for the environment You know, these days, the pollution is a big, big topic. How do we care for our world? God told us that we are supposed to manage it and have authority over that. So those are all some of the some of the things that are related to that. Global warming. You hear about global warming? It's been a hot topic for the last several years. However, in fact, some scientists are claiming that the world in the past 20 years or so has actually been cooling. And the Earth has always had periods where it was cooler or warmer. But now they're not so much calling it global warming, they're calling it climate change. And so the fact is that in our world, we need to do what we can to take our responsibility and authority of the world. And it's a big task to manage that. And especially, as I said, as we have the population growth, as there in modern times we've had many inventions or innovations that actually are bad for the environment. So those are all things that we may debate when it comes to managing the world that God created. Next one, in letter E. We have the privilege of relationship with God and others. And this may actually be the most important way that we are special in God's creation. Of all creatures that God created, it's only man who can have a special relationship with God, a special relationship that's personal. Although God desires to bless humans and give them many things, that's not the reason that He created us. The main reason is that He created us so that He could know and be known by God. So that we could know and be known by God. Isn't that amazing? That He wants us to know Him. He wants to be known. And it says He was looking for them. You know, they were in hiding because they had sinned. But He said that He came down to walk with them in the cool of the day. Maybe He did that every day. Wouldn't that have been a special relationship? Before sin came into the world, He would come down and walk with them every day. Now, some people say that God needed people because He was lonely. Did you ever hear that? God needed people because He was lonely. But God was perfectly happy in His relationship within the Trinity. He didn't need anybody to become complete. God was not lonely, and in fact, figuratively speaking, when He created people after the sin, gave Him a headache. We give Him a headache. He didn't need people, but He created us. So anyhow, and even though He knew that we were going to sin, He created us because in doing so, He could share His glory and majesty with people who were created in His image, people with whom He could have a relationship. So man has a consciousness of God that other creatures and created beings don't have. You and I can know Him and have a relationship with Him through our prayers and through our praises and worship and through studying His Word. You know, when it comes to animals, it's true that some, like cats and dogs or pets, they can relate to you in some ways. I'm still trying to figure out how you can relate to a goldfish. But some people keep goldfish and other things. But you know, that is a very different relationship. Yeah, Pastor Tommy, you know, you have the dogs. Would you ever try to carry out a discussion about God with your dogs? No, that wouldn't be possible. It's only that people that have that God consciousness in them. As I mentioned, God only created us to have, not only created us to have a vertical relationship with Him, but a horizontal relationship with others who are also made in His image. And yeah, it's fortunate that we don't have to be like dogs and walk up behind someone and smell them so that we can know them. We have the ability to have a relationship with each other, and God created that in us. That's part of His design. I won't say more about horizontal relationships today because that's what Pastor Tommy has been sharing with a lot. He's been sharing about how we can relate to each other in the River Grace family, or how we can relate to each other, you know, as brothers and sisters in Christ. So in the beginning, man was created in God's image, holy and without sin, so that he could have a relationship with God. Genesis 1:30 says that everything that God made at the beginning was good. In that first chapter, that's what he ends with. Everything that is in his creation was good. So at that time, we were, or people, Adam and Eve, were in relationship with God in a perfect way that shared His glory. There are no doubt other elements of God's character that we could talk about today, but I think these are probably the most important ones. The problem is what? Because of our sin, the image of God in us has been damaged. That does not mean that we no longer bear any resemblance to the things that God has put in us. We still bear His image, but it's been damaged. We still are born, when we're born into the world, He has still put those characteristics that we talked about inside of us, but they're not connected. And that's because of our sin. But that doesn't mean that we have no hope. It doesn't mean that all is lost. And because that's really the heart of the gospel message, that His image in us can be restored, that we can have a relationship with Him again. And that comes through His Holy Spirit, that comes through being born again, that comes through reestablishing our relationship with God and allowing Him to work in us and to change us, that we become more and more like Him in His image. And that's why, let's go to the statement of faith once more. God created man in His own image. Man rebelled against God's law, sinned, and felt His spiritual image was corrupted, so that He needed to be born again. So the next time we're going to be dealing with this last sentence, this last section. But in Ephesians Chapter 4, we were talking in our Connect group last Friday evening. Can we read those verses from Ephesians Chapter 4? And this is, you know, the way that God has established for us to become more in relationship with Him, to be able to restore the image that He once had, that we can honor God. Let's read the verses together. chapter 4, let me read the verses. Since you have heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God, truly righteous and holy. So he can do that through the Spirit's renewing our thoughts and our attitudes. And in this chapter, in these verses, we're commanded to put off the old and to put on the new nature. And the purpose is so that our image of God can be restored to one of holiness as God is holy. I wish I had more time to share with you about some of these issues that we had. That one, yeah. I wish we had more time to share with you today about some of those practical issues and how they relate, but there's just not time today. But we still are faced with these issues. If we want to say what's the right way and the wrong way on the issues, the right way would always be in a way that honors God and brings him glory. The way that represents his holiness. And that's the things that we can choose. I think most of you know enough of the Bible that you can probably say, you know, what are the right issues? What's right and wrong in these various issues. But God, as we pray, God can help us to understand them. But as I say, the right choice is always going to be the way that honors God and glorifies him in his holiness, in his righteousness, and in every other way. In conclusion, I just want to read a quote that I just saw yesterday. And going back to Moses. 40 years learning he was a nobody, and 40 years discovering what God can do as a nobody. And maybe there are some people here today that are in that first place. 40 years thinking he was somebody. You know, Moses grew up in the palace of the king of Pharaoh. He had the best education. He had everything that he needed in life. And he probably, maybe he didn't really need God. We don't know much about, the Bible doesn't tell us much about his life. But maybe there are a lot of people in our world today that are in this position. They think that they're somebody. They think they don't need God. They think that you know, they're good enough in their own right. That's where some people are. Other people may be in the second 40-year period. I'm a nobody. I'm sinful. I can't do anything. God can't use me. You know, saying those kinds of things. But we are made in God's image. And in those times when we feel that way, and probably all of us feel that way at some point in our lives, that we can remember that we are made in God's image. We are made to represent his honor, his glory, and to be his representatives here on earth. Maybe you're in this place in the last 40 years discovering what God can do with a nobody. And that's hopefully where all of us are today. Yeah, we're not yet perfect. We're not yet there. We all have different things that we struggle with. But the truth is that we are made in God's image. And we can be somebody, again, that represents God in his glory and his righteousness.